Hello and welcome back to the Product Launch Podcast. As always, I'm the host, Sean Boyce, CEO and founder of Next Step. I'd like to welcome to the show today our guest and my friend, Chris Hawn. Chris is the managing director at Nividous. His background includes finance, IoT, and he is currently the managing director for North America, where he's working to grow and scale the business inside the US. Hello, Chris. How are you? And welcome to the show.
I'm great, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Hey, excited to have you here to talk about our exciting topic. But before we go into that, if you could, for our listeners, talk a little bit more about your background and how you became the managing director at Nividous.
Sure. So it actually started, my career started in finance, working in New York and Wall Street, in that rat race for about 12 years. Eventually, once I learned how the sausage was made, I decided that I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life and was looking for an alternative route. And luckily, I ended up connecting with a gentleman I knew very well, a very serial entrepreneur that was involved in a tech startup in the IoT space. I got involved with them and spent about 2.5, 3 years there before we merged with a public company. And once that exit happened, I was looking for my next venture and was really, really happy to find Nividous. It was a situation where it was an established company, been around almost 10 years, great product. What they really needed was an ability to scale and grow here in the US. They had a lot of growth overseas and in Europe and Asia and India. And we had a handful of pretty large clients here in the US, but we really needed to build out distribution and figure out ways that we could broaden our horizons here and grow the business. And they asked me to join and be responsible for doing so.
Excellent. Well, thank you for providing the background. Really excited to talk about the topic, which gets more into the basically what you offer and as the managing director there at Nividous. And that is with regard to HyperAutomation. So best place to probably start there would be to define it and talk a little bit about how it gets confused for other terms as well too. Because when talking about these topics, right, hyperautomation, robotics, RPA, all these terms come up. If you could define them for us and talk a little bit about the differences between them and which one, Nividous specifically falls into.
Yeah, sure. Great question. Yeah, so hyperautomation it was coined by Gartner at the beginning of this year. In fact, Gartner labeled hyperautomation as the #1 trend in the software technology, strategic technology space for 2020, and which was huge for us because we really built our solution around the idea of hyperautomation, but for years had a challenging time separating ourselves from a traditional RPA, robotic process automation organization. In Gartner's sort of coining this term really helped us identify ourselves and separate ourselves from the pack. Really what hyperautomation is it's bolting on additional tools to the core of the solution, which is robotic process automation. But it's using both robotic process automation at the core along with AI, machine learning, natural language processing, as well as business process management solutions as a whole solution to help companies automate processes. I could probably talk a little bit about robotic process automation if you'd like and sort of define that, because that at the core is really what makes up the capabilities of hyperautomation. It's the AI and machine learning components that really allow us to cast a wider net in terms of what we can accomplish for our customers.
Yeah, so Chris, I'm definitely going to take you up on that. If you could explain to us a little bit more about the background of robotic process automation first.
Sure. So robotic process automation is the use of a software bot that we train based off of rules to execute a task that a human has historically been doing in a much more timely manner. And think of repetitive, time-intensive tasks, that involve a lot of email, a lot of spreadsheets. Maybe it's disconnected systems and relaying data from one system to another system if there's no APIs. But anything that tends to just be very time heavy, and it's causing employees to, be bogged down by just a lot of paperwork, as we sometimes refer to it. Bots sit on a desktop, like I said, just as like a human would, except based off of these rules, they're executing these tasks within a fraction of the time that is spent for a human to do it.
And you mentioned bot as part of that response as well too. That's something else I wanted to talk more about in terms of, right, especially visualizing how you would use and leverage the technology. So now that we've talked about some of the differences between, right, what technically is RPA or robotic process automation and how that differs from hyperautomation, I'm curious to know more about use cases for clients and how they use it. And I'm also curious to learn more about this bot. So if you could talk more about probably both of those, that would be really cool.
Yeah, so let's talk about the bot first. I'll share a funny story with you. I was talking to an investment firm in New York about a year ago and having a great conversation about the capabilities and of how this tool could really help them automate a lot of their spreadsheet work, a lot of reconciliation that they were doing. And the gentleman I was talking to was enthusiastic and excited, and he sort of paused and said, well, Chris, I don't know where I'd put it. And I was thrown off by his question, and I sort of paused, and he said, well, yeah, I'm in New York. We don't have a big space here. Like, where would I put the bot? And I realized that he thought it was a physical robot, which it's not. So these bots actually just sit on, as I mentioned earlier, they just sit on a machine or in a private cloud. So they're software bots, just to clarify that.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah, yeah. They're much less expensive because they're not giant human bots, human sized bots. But yeah, so we'll clarify that. In regards to the second part of your question is, yes, there's hundreds of examples or case studies where bots can be used across all business functions. So it could be bots can also work on one process one day and another process on another day, and so on and so forth. The idea is that what you really look to do is maximize that bot's production. No different than you would onboarding an employee and setting tasks for that employee. You want to do the same for a bot. So the bots, when they get, the idea is to maximize the amount of time they're in production. And these bots work 24/7, 365, and then again, in countless different business functions. And oftentimes, bots have 10, 20, 30 different processes that they've been trained to execute. And it's up to the company to decide when they're deployed to do each task, how those are managed depending on the existing organization's process in place or changes they're looking to make. But there are literally hundreds of case studies. And the one I'll share that I think is your audience may be able to relate to is if you've ever applied for a mortgage. There's a lot of paperwork that gets sent in, if you remember, when you're applying for a mortgage, right? It's bank statements, retirement accounts, applications, and as that information is sent in, usually, which is nowadays, you scan it and you email it in, it would be received by usually an admin or a loan officer that's taking that information and extracting the data from those documents or those emails and putting those into systems internally within the organization. One of those systems that many mortgage companies use is just called a loan origination software. And once that data is put into the loan origination software, much of the process is now automated, right? And it kicks out an approval. But the challenge is that many organizations are still manually inputting that data, right? Until it gets to the LOS system, it's not fully automated. So what a bot is capable of doing is actually being trained to follow all of those steps to create a full-blown process that's automated all the way out to the edge, all the way out to the inbound email until approval or non-approval. And what we have designed is a bot to actually receive an email directly. So rather than your inbound email going to a loan officer, it's now being directed to a bot. That bot can read each email, both the subject and the body of the email, using natural language processing, as well as some other tools to extract the information it needs to understand what to do with that email. So for some emails, if it's a bank statement, they're not supposed to be handling that right now. They're going to handle that tomorrow, that they're going to file that for later. They're going to read that and understand, oh, I do bank statements tomorrow. If they see an email that has a loan application, they say, oh, that's my job to extract the information from that document. I'm going to do that now. It's going to file the email. It's going to open up the PDF, oftentimes file the PDF in a specific folder, and then extract that data from that document using not just OCR, but machine learning and AI to get as accurate as we can, extracting that data, which then will get put into a loan origination software. It could be a legacy software. It could be any existing software that the organization is using. So if that took a human 30 minutes on average at this organization we're working with, it takes about 2 to 3 minutes to extract that data. Now you've freed up 25 minutes, almost 30 minutes for that loan officer to focus on more mission critical work. Maybe it's business development. Maybe it's having conversations with potential customers or trying to close deals. So that's the real power is identifying the areas within a process that can be automated to free up that human to focus on more mission critical work.
Excellent example. And that creates only probably a million more questions for me because I'm geeking out about the possibilities. But I want to touch on one in particular, which I know we've talked about before, because there's this perception of this impending wave of automation and what it's going to mean for jobs everywhere, right? So you touched on it a little bit in terms of that response, but I'd love to hear you talk more about what we're expecting, like what we're expecting to change and the benefits of it related to some of the concerns about how automation is going to change the way work gets done today. So can you talk a little bit about that in terms of as automation becomes more prominent and capable of doing these like repetitive tasks, how that's going to benefit the workforce and what the future looks like in terms of people and interacting with technology when it comes to hyperautomation?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think the first thing I want to talk about to answer that is really about the perception of bots and how they will affect jobs moving forward, because that comes up often. It's a concern. And there are scenarios that bots will end up, I think, executing tasks to the extent where those jobs won't be needed. However, I think we're not as far along as people perceive this to be. Bots aren't quite that good yet. I think that there is certainly a number of tasks that these bots can handle, but for the most part, it's not about taking jobs at all. It's about freeing up employees to focus on the most important aspects of their job or other things that they can do to help the organization. So it's important for organizations that are looking to adopt this technology to understand how it can be received by their employees and what's important to them as an organization. We deal a lot with small and mid-sized companies that culture is really important to them. Their employees are really important to them. And they don't want them to feel like they're being overtaken by a bot. The good news is it's like I said, it's rarely the case. In most scenarios, it's really about, finding ways that you can add value to that employee. And I think I go back to when I was in New York. At one point, my boss came to me and he said, Chris, this summer we're going to provide you an intern. And that was a big deal. We had a paid internship program. We actually even put our interns up in temporary housing. And it was a big expense for our organization. I felt appreciated. I felt valued that they were going to provide this resource for me. And it was a great resource. I had a kid that was at Duke and he came up and caught on very quickly. And I handed him a bunch of tasks that I need to get done. And instead of leaving the office at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday, I was leaving at, 5:30, 6 o'clock. And it was sort of a breath of fresh air that summer to feel like I had the life and wasn't working 70 hours a week. And then August 15th came around and he went back to college. And there I was sort of going back to my routine, and a lot of that mundane, tedious work I was stuck doing again. And then as I came to Nividous, I thought about it. I realized, wait, a lot of what I had passed off to my intern was work that could be easily automated by a bot. And I thought about how we position this to our employees. I remember feeling valued that my organization invested in a resource to help me. And it wasn't a threat, So I think the way that we position this to our employees is key, because they have to understand that this is a value. You are investing in a resource that can help them in a number of different ways. Job satisfaction being one of them. There's not many people that I know that really enjoy doing a lot of repetitive data entry type of work. So if we can free up that workload and then talk to our employees about transitioning into other areas of the business even, or aspects of their role and responsibility that they really enjoy most. That's the real power of creating better culture, improving your retention, and providing a resource to your employees. At the same time, creating a lot of efficiency and saving time and money. So it can be, as we approach our employees and we introduce this to them, it's just a fragile conversation. I think we have to educate our customers as we engage with them on ways that we can help them understand how to do so. Because I've seen it the opposite. I've seen where there's been a lack of communication, and we're introduced as the company that's going to come in and meet with you to learn about your process and your tasks that you're doing, and that they have a bot that's going to do that work for you. Well, guess what? You have an employee that's shut down. So it's hard to extract that information. Now they're defensive, and now they're worried, and that never creates a good environment. And that's what we want to avoid, because as I mentioned, the bots aren't that good. Like, there's a lot they can do, but there's a lot they can't do. Even with AI, even with machine learning, it's a fraction of the workload that these bots can handle. And yes, it's powerful. Yes, it's impactful, but it's more of a resource than it is a threat to our employees.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of great topics there, and really made it easy for us to understand a lot of the common objections that you're facing in terms of the technology, right? You mentioned having to educate those about the technology in terms of how to use it appropriately. So, right, we talk about that a lot on the show with other people working in different types of software applications. And that's always an aspect to what we're doing. When we're innovating, that typically brings about change. For a large percentage of the population, change can be scary, right? Unless properly educated and understand how to use it, and then the benefits of it, right? Because that's what gets me excited, is what you talked about was the tasks in which the bot can do are probably like significantly repetitive and relatively low value add, or in terms of they're relatively expensive in terms of having actual human capital working on those tasks, which sound like they're perfect applications for the bot. It's not that they're not valuable. I misspoke there. It's that they're just ultra time consuming and super repetitive, which doesn't necessarily lend itself super favorably to a person doing that all day, every day, right? You can reallocate those human resources in your team into like bigger, more challenging, more complicated tasks, which are super high value add for the organization and probably more interesting work for those in which they're going to do it. And then simultaneously, like, it can complement each other where they're thinking about different instances of how to use the technology after they gain a little bit more experience with it and they realize what they're capable of. Just like the story you told when you were working with an intern and it like seemingly changed everything about your work life.
Yep. Yeah.
Super cool.
Really good point.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see where this is going from here. And part of what I wanted to ask you about next is in terms of where do you see the technology, disrupting the most moving forward, perhaps from like an industry perspective, right? You gave us the example of the mortgage industry or finance and things like that. But I'm curious to learn more from you too in terms of, right, what industries do you feel are particularly ripe for this type of automation that can really leverage the technology, and how do you see those changing moving forward once they have access to it?
Yeah, good question. It's hard to define a specific industry where I think this can make a huge impact because it's so agnostic. I get that question all the time. What industries do you focus on? Well, historically speaking, the most adoption has been in finance and healthcare. However, as I look at our our client base, it's across many industries. We have retail, we've got e-commerce, we've got manufacturing. Manufacturing is probably one where I feel that there's a lot of opportunity there. There's a lot of antiquated systems, and I think there's a lot of transaction-heavy work, which leads to great opportunity to automate. I think that's an area, though, that will grow, is the use of this technology in manufacturing. But the biggest area of growth that I see is not necessarily its industry, it's by the size of the companies that have utilized this or have adopted this technology. There's been a lot of adoption at the enterprise space. There's some companies that have been using this technology for years. Where we see is a huge drop-off in adoption in the middle market and even some small businesses. So I think that's where we're going to see the most amount of growth, is new adoption of the technology with smaller businesses, with scaling businesses, and in the mid-market. And I think that area excites me. I think that we're as a company, we're very focused on helping the middle market and small businesses. And I think what's also allowed us to do this is to focus on mid-market is the cost of implementation is not as high as many people expect. We don't have to get into the numbers today, but we are almost always able to provide a very solid ROI based off of executing a bot or hyperautomation on one specific process. So there's a lot of room for this industry, for this technology to grow across all industries, especially in the small, mid-sized businesses.
Yeah, perhaps that's a better way to think about it. So thank you for clarifying. I mean, imagine the type of work in which hyperautomation can help with probably is relatively universal, just a matter of, how much of it do you have? And then when is the technology the right solution for it? So that's a great point. Thank you for being here, Chris, and sharing this information about these various technologies. It's very informative for both myself and our audience. I have only a couple questions for you before we let you go. And the first one is, what resources, if any, would you share with our audience where they can go to learn more about Nividous or the technology or anything related to those topics?
Yeah, go to our website, nividous.com. It sounds self-serving, I get it. But there's a lot of great content on our site that's non-biased, it's educational, a lot of great resources. We've got case study after case study. We have a lot of great webinars that we've conducted. It's just a plethora of great information that I would point everybody to, and I think will guide you to understanding more about hyperautomation, about the capabilities on how this can, how it can impact your business. And I think that's a good resource.
Thank you for providing. And last question I have for you is, who should reach out to you and how can they get in touch?
Well, I'm an open door policy. So anybody that wants to reach out, we don't discriminate. So, feel free to call, reach out to myself, anybody at our team at Nividous. We like to talk to leadership within companies that run departments. We talk a lot with COOs and CFOs at organizations, which is great, but and I think ultimately we need to talk to those decision makers. But I really enjoy talking to the head of HR or the director of finance and accounting, the head of billing departments. They know what they're struggling with. They know what keeps them up at night or what's frustrating for their employees on a daily basis. Those leaders within organization, I think they're very influential in spreading the message to leadership that this is a resource that we should look into, because they feel the pain, sometimes more so than senior leadership. So if you're if you're running a group or a team or a division at an organization, and you can relate to the amount of paperwork, the amount of emails, the amount of documents that your team is stuck handling on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, you feel that pain, call us. Let us educate you on ways that we can help by utilizing these tools and freeing up those employees so you can sit down with them and say, hey, what else can you do with this organization that gets you excited and can help us hit our mission? So those would be good people for us to talk to.
Very cool. And I want to make sure that we get that in there as well too. What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, just connect with me on LinkedIn. So, find me on LinkedIn. They can email me at chris.hawn@nividous.com. Those would be the best ways to reach me. And looking forward to it. We're happy just to do a general introduction call. That's how our sales process really starts, with a 30-minute intro to HyperAutomation and how it can impact your business. And, it's just educational, and usually that leads to getting to show you a bot in production at a demo, on a demo, which is always fun. I think, Sean, you may have seen that, which is just fascinating to watch a bot run around the screen executing tasks as quickly as they can do it. So it's usually, pretty educational initially. We take a very consultative approach to figure out how HyperAutomation can help.
Love it. And I have seen it, and I highly recommend anybody check it out. It is super cool. So thanks for that, Chris. We'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. And thanks for being here and sharing your knowledge and experience with myself and our audience.
Yep, absolutely, Sean. You're one of my favorite guys to work with, and I'm glad to see you doing so well.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Product Launch Podcast powered by Next Step. If you or anyone you know is involved in scaling a B2B SaaS business, please have them reach out to me about becoming a potential guest on our show. They can email me at sean@nextstep.io. That's SEAN@nxtstep.io. This time, we'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of our show, Next Step Consulting. Would you like to know what the right next steps are for your B2B SaaS business? Are you trying to grow and scale, but you're stuck? We can help. To find out how Next Step can help your B2B SaaS business achieve its goals, please email me, sean@nextstep.io. That's SEAN@nxtstep.io. Thanks, and keep disrupting.